Good evening, everyone. My name is Michelle Storms. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Executive Director at the ACLU of Washington. I'm speaking to you from the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Coast Salish people, who have stewarded this land for generations. Our downtown ACLU office sits on the unceded territory of the Duwamish people. We must always remember the role our country played in stripping them of their land, culture, and language, and we must recognize that there is much more work we need to do to make things right for our Indigenous siblings and to make this country fair for all people. Welcome to our Flights and Rights event. As you know, in the good old days, they were typically hosted in breweries and event spaces around the state, and most often in the gathering space of KEXP here in Seattle. KEXP has been an important partner over the years, and tonight, KEXP DJ Gabriel Teodros has once again curated a special playlist for tonight. It's available anytime on Spotify, but wait till this program is over. So check out the chat box and our website for a link. We've been online with this event for a full year now, and since we've been staying home. And even though we can't be together in person, we still try to bring flights to go with your rights. So tonight, if you're in the Tacoma area, please visit 7 Seas Brewing and mention the ACLU's tab for $5 or 10% off, whichever is greater. You'll also see details in the chat box and on our website about that. Additionally, everyone in attendance tonight has been entered into an ACLU of Washington Supreme swag giveaway. For the first time, the prize includes KEXP and ACLU koozies. You can't get these anywhere else, so we'll draw names after the event and notify 3 lucky winners by email tomorrow. So now, getting into some content. Most of what we will talk about this evening relates to our legislative work, but as you know, we're also in the courts. And since we last met over Zoom, we've had some landmark legal victories, and I wanted to just celebrate a couple of them with you quickly. We served as amicus, or friend of the court, in an advisory role for State versus Blake. In this victory, the Washington State Supreme Court ruled that the state's drug possession laws are unconstitutional since they allow for someone who unknowingly possesses drugs to be convicted. We hope that this will be an opportunity to make a permanent and significant change in drug possession and conviction in our state. Now, there's a lot of questions about retroactivity and about what happens next. So please stay tuned because we will keep you up to date. And we'll be eventually providing a frequently asked questions on our website about State versus Blake because this is really important. So watch for that probably by the end of next week. In another important case, we helped clarify that police owe a duty of reasonable care to people in Washington. Building on last year's victory in Beltran-Serrano versus the city of Tacoma, the Washington Supreme Court ruled in Mancini versus the city of Tacoma, once again, that police may be sued for negligence and breaching the duty of reasonable care. The Mancini case involved police executing a search warrant for drugs at the wrong apartment with little to no investigation and subjecting the woman who lived there to significant trauma. Our amicus brief explained the importance of holding police accountable through civil liability. We continue to fight the legacy and current presence of racism and othering and violence within policing. The ACLU of Washington is working to transform that system via divestment and reinvestment and other means into something that communities want and can benefit from, where public safety truly belongs to everyone. There's a lot we can all do to help. So with that, I'm thrilled to introduce tonight's talk and our speakers. We're so lucky to have with us this evening Nickeia Hunter and Sonia Joseph. Both Nickeia and Sonia are impacted family members advocating through the Washington Coalition for Police Accountability. The youngest of 3 siblings, Nickeia Hunter, was born in Anchorage, Alaska. Nickeia Hunter's brother was a victim of mass incarceration for 25 years over time and ultimately was killed by the same system. Nickeia is the chair of the Legal Redress Committee of the NAACP in Vancouver, the Chapter 1139 of the Clark County Justice Group. Nickeia has 2 biological children and a non-biological child she's been raising since he was 2, plus the 6 children that Nickeia and family added when her brother was murdered. Nickeia has been a carpenter for 10 years, has a passion for justice, for making real change in life, in the community, so that it will impact generations to come. Her family is her #1 priority. She practices what she preaches and holds firm in her belief that together we can move the changes needed to ensure we have a prosperous existence today, tomorrow, and always. Born in Pakistan, Sonia Joseph is the eldest of 4 siblings. She's a mentor for youth in the community and an activist with Not This Time. Sonia is the mother of 2 biological sons and 2 stepsons, and over the course of her 18 years as a medical massage therapist, has had a growing passion for continuing education, which ultimately led to the world of computer technology. Sonia became an activist for social justice after her eldest son was killed in 2017 by law enforcement. She enjoys meditation, music, dancing, and family is also her #1 priority. Her goals are personal growth, sharing her expertise, staying positive, being healthy, being humble. We'll also hear tonight from Roxana Gomez. Roxana is a lobbyist at the ACLU of Washington, where she advocates on juvenile justice, voting rights, housing and homelessness issues, and criminal legal reforms in Olympia. Prior to joining the ACLU of Washington staff, she served the city of Seattle in now Council President Lorena Gonzalez's office as her legislative aide. Roxana earned her BA in Public Health from the University of Washington and currently lives in Seattle with her husband and Aussie Doodle Theo. Enoka Herat is also with us this evening. You've heard from Enoka before. She's our Police Practices and Immigration Counsel here at the ACLU of Washington. Her job is to expand and enforce the civil rights of immigrants and to ensure local law enforcement does not aid any administration's agenda of mass deportation. Enoka joined us in 2017 in direct response to the Trump administration's attacks on immigrant rights. She previously worked at the Washington Defender Association's Immigration Project, where she supported public defenders in navigating the immigration consequences of criminal offenses. Enoka graduated from the University of Washington Law School, served as a judicial law clerk at the Seattle Immigration Court through the Department of Justice Honors Program, is a former president of the South Asian Bar Association of Washington, and is currently on the board of One America. Enoka is the child of Sri Lankan immigrants and lives with her husband and 2 children in Seattle. Our speakers have a lot to share with you, and there's a lot of work to be done around police accountability, so we're going to dive right in. I've asked our speakers to first just each say a word or 2 about who they are so that you can get a sense of them. And then Enoka is going to share about our legislative agenda in policing. And then I'm just going to launch into a discussion with all of these brilliant people. And also we'll be, of course, watching for your questions to bring to our speakers as well. So Nickeia, if you would come off mute and just say hello and let us know who you are.
Hello, good evening. My name is Nickeia Hunter. I'm an impacted family member and the chair of the Vancouver branch NAACP Legal Redress Committee. Thank you for having me.
We're so glad to have you here and so appreciate the work that you do in the community and the heart you bring. Roxana, would you please say hello?
Yes, thank you so much for having me as well. I'm Roxana Gomez. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm one of the lobbyists with the ACLU, and I have the pleasure of working with Nickeia and Sonia and Enoka every day on these policing bills that are so personal and so important to pass in Olympia this legislative session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sonia, please say hello.
Hello, I'm Sonia Joseph. I'm the mother of Giovanni Joseph McDade. My son complied to a traffic stop and later fled the scene. A simple traffic stop that turned into a manhunt, and an innocent young Black man was murdered. I'm part of Not This Time, a local grassroots organization, and I worked on Initiative 940, and I'm also a member of the Coalition for Police Accountability, where I work on police reform and hoping that impacted families of police violence have access to justice and accountability. And I'm currently working on changing policies that will help frame the future for policing in Washington. And thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here, and so much gratitude to you as well for doing this work, even in the face of your own grief. Enoka, if you would introduce yourself and then go right on into talking about some of the legislative agenda, that would be great.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and being part of this conversation. My name is Enoka Herat. My pronouns are she and hers, and I'm the Police Practices and Immigration Counsel here at the ACLU of Washington. And we can get started on the slides. We have a couple slides to help us walk through some of the legislative priorities around policing that we've been working on. And as Roxana mentioned earlier, Nickeia, Sonia, Roxana, and I are part of a team, and we're part of a team with a number of other folks. And we have really been working on some of these bills, and we're excited to share them with you. The first thing, though, I wanted to say is to really sort of ground the work. Oh, if you go back one slide, I really want to sort of ground the work in this slide, and this is a list of names. It's not even a complete list, but it's a list of names of people who've been killed by police in Washington state over the past 5 or so years. And the names in red represent the family members represent people who've been killed by police who have family members in the Washington Coalition for Police Accountability. And at the ACLU, we are committed to supporting the work of the coalition and really being guided by the leadership of the families who are at the heart of this work and who, with their hearts, are really pushing for changes. There is too much police violence in Washington and everywhere else in this country. And while so much of policing is local, and there is so much happening at the local level in Seattle and Spokane and everywhere in between, and we see these people's movements that have been, just gaining momentum and gaining strength, calling for defunding and divestment, et cetera, et cetera. When we think about the state legislature, it is a different question for them to answer. And I think that with state legislation, what we can do is really set some baselines across the state for better outcomes to reduce police violence. And so we're going to talk about some of the bills that we've been prioritizing to do that. So if you could go to the next slide, please. One of the bills is HB 1054. It's the police tactics bill, and Representative Johnson from Federal Way is the prime sponsor of this bill. We actually just had a hearing on it this morning. And what this bill seeks to do is to ban a number of egregious tactics and equipment that we know have been disproportionately used against communities of color. Among the prohibitions are bans on chokeholds and neck restraints. Chokehold, that tactic was used in the killing of George Floyd. Neck restraints is a broader category that was used in the killing of Eric Garner and Manny Ellis. There's also prohibitions on military equipment. We don't need tanks to be rolling around the cities, in Thurston County, and that kind of military equipment really changes our neighborhoods into war zones, and studies have shown that actually it creates a sense in police that they're fighting an enemy versus serving. And it also bans no-knock warrants, which of course which are part of a staple of the failed drug war and was used in the killing of Breonna Taylor. The bill also puts restrictions on other dangerous tactics, including using dogs or canines. Dog bites, police dog bites are as vicious as shark bites, and they're really difficult to do sort of halfway, and so they cause a lot of harm and damage. Tear gas, we saw how tear gas was abused, particularly in the protest context. Tear gas has been banned by the Geneva Convention, so it cannot be used by our military during wars, but it has been used in our cities and towns and has a lot of repercussions. Where there's currently, in the current language, it is allowed for crowd control, which is the protest situation, so we're pushing back on that to try to make the bill even more restrictive. There's also restrictions on vehicular pursuits. So these are hot pursuits and car chases, which are really popular in movies, but are incredibly and inherently dangerous. And is a big escalation of force and are often used in very low level traffic offenses, as we heard Sonia speak about earlier. There's also restrictions on shooting at moving vehicles. So all these tactics, you know, there are names and faces we can attach to them from just within the coalition itself. And so these are critical tactics to ban or to restrict. And it had a hearing, as I mentioned, in the Senate this morning, and hopefully it'll get voted out of the policy committee next week. Next slide. One of the other priority bills we're working on is HB 1310. This bill is about the use of force. So the first bill was preventative in the sense that it said, you know, it took certain tactics and equipment off the table. Officers aren't allowed to use these things. This bill is powerful because it talks about when force can be used, and it limits what force can be used and when force can be used by officers against residents of Washington. And it puts in place a statewide de-escalation standard, and that is a huge deal. Right now, there are over 300 police departments and 300 different policies on when officers and how officers can use force. But this would make it statewide, and it would emphasize de-escalation over confrontation. You know, so we don't want officers to be making split-second decisions because we see the harm that causes. And so this would really slow things down and require de-escalation. It also, as I mentioned, limits when force can be used. And one of the things we see when we look at people who've been killed in Washington, there are so many instances when the person wasn't committing a crime at all, was completely unarmed, and when where police you know, jumped to the conclusion that something was happening, and that would be completely unlawful under this bill. And so it would make it so that you can only really use force to begin with when force is necessary to, you know, in effectuating an arrest or prevent someone from fleeing, or where there is imminent threat of harm. And I think most people assume that is when that police can currently only use force when necessary, but that's actually not the current standard. The current standard is that uses of force, well, there's a state law that says when arresting someone, police can use any means necessary. It's this blank check to use force as an officer would. And the standard that officers are judged by when they do use force is whether another reasonable officer would have used the same force. And the answer to that question is almost always yes. And so when you hear reports in the news of killings that are deemed justified by internal policies, it's because of that standard. And so this bill changes that standard to instead ask the question, was the use of force necessary, not based on what the officer was feeling at the time, but based on the totality of the circumstances? Would a jury determine whether the force was necessary? And that's a transformative change really across the state. It also limits when deadly force can be used, so that it's really the last resort, so that everything else has been exhausted. And you know, the goal of this is to reduce violence in everyday interactions and to make sure that deadly force is really a rarity. And preserving life should really be the ultimate aim in all these encounters. Next slide, please. So while those are the priorities, these are other bills that we are supporting. Independent investigations, that is to ensure that, you know, we know that when a killing or lethal use of force happens, that officers can't investigate other officers. You know, we need for that process to be independent so that the very beginning of the process of holding an officer accountable can be credible and independent. Another bill is the Oversight and Decertification Bill, SB 5051. And that bill, what it does is decertification means that an officer is no longer allowed to be an officer in Washington state. And so if there has been a pattern of misconduct, it removes the officer from the police force sort of permanently. There's also a data collection bill so that we can really be tracking this use of force and see, you know, where the trends are, where the problems are across the state. And then finally, the felony bar. This has been an obstacle to accountability. It's something that gets in the way of victims and their families suing police officers. And what it says is that if, and this is current law, is that if the person who was killed was suspected of committing a felony, then they can't bring a charge against an officer. And what often happens is it's a police word against the person, the victim, who, if they're killed, you know, there's not really anyone advocating there. So we're trying to limit that as much as possible so that we can hold officers accountable when they harm people and violate people's rights. Thank you. And I'll pass it on to Michelle to get the discussion going.
Thank you so much, Enoka. Really great informative overview. We actually had one audience question already related to the Bill 1054 on tactics, about whether there were some amendments to that. I think the question was just, were there amendments that were of concern, or can you talk about the amendments that were attached to 1054?
Sure, and I'm happy to bounce it to Roxana if you want to take that one, at least since I've been talking so much.
Sure. So I guess from a process stand view, because we the bill was just heard in the Senate today, we technically haven't seen any amendments, but we have been working with the prime sponsor on some technical things that we'd like to fix that we didn't get a chance to do so in the House. One of them about clearing up the definition of vehicular pursuits, and like some other stuff here and there, but frankly, you know, we don't really know what's going to come. We're just hoping, crossing our fingers, that we did a really good job and convinced legislators to pass the bill as it is today. But yeah, we can definitely follow up with folks when we have that information.
Thank you, Roxana. And another one about the bills that I'll just take now before I get into some of the other stories and some of the other advocacy with the family members. And so this is for either Roxana or Enoka, I guess, about, I think this must be related to the decertification. Curious about how to take the removed officers, or prevent the removed officers from entering private security and continuing their patterns of abusive authority.
Well, one of the things that SB 5051 around decertification does is that it ensures that any sort of misconduct doesn't get removed from a person's personnel file. Right now, there isn't any restriction on that. So sometimes those, I mean, it's hard to believe, but sometimes those cases just get destroyed, you know, and don't sort of carry on with the officer. And so all that will be in someone's file, all that will be public in a sense. And so, you know, private security firms will have that information, and in a way that they don't currently have that information. And so it would increase their liability risk to hire someone who has that pattern. And again, this is just another way to sort of discourage officers from not only engaging in the conduct to begin with, but from departments and private security officers, et cetera, from hiring.
That's really helpful. So, I mean, I'm sure there are still things that we don't know about the implications of some of that passage, but it does kind of just highlight that the things that were previously hidden, much was hidden about an officer's experience or past complaints about excessive use of force and so forth. And so it would make that not hidden, and therefore that information would be available to other employers. So that's really helpful. I think the last sort of technical thing I want to touch on with regard to the legislative session, I guess more broadly, and I'll direct this to Roxana, is a lot of people don't understand this, but, you know, because every state is different, but in Washington state, we have a session that runs, you know, roughly 3 months or 4 months, depending on the year. And so if you could maybe just help us understand, because we're absolutely going to be asking people later to support and take action on some of these bills, right? Like, where are we in session and how does it all fit together?
Yeah, so thanks, Michelle. So our sessions are basically mandated in our Constitution, and we're set by these very like clear guidelines on even number years. So, you know, and an even number years, we have 60-day sessions. And on odd number years, we have 105-day sessions. And those 105-day sessions are essentially our budget setting years, which is why we allow a little bit more time. But that also means we have more time for these legislative conversations. So this past Tuesday, March 9th, we just had the House of Origin cutoff, which means if bills originated in the House, they have to get out of the House by that date. If they originated in the Senate, they have to get out of the Senate by that date. So all of the bills that Enoka just provided details on, all of those bills made it out of their House of Origin. So all of those bills are now in the opposite chamber. They're getting public hearings in their respective policy committees that they're going to be heard. And our upcoming deadline is March 26th. So March 26th is the date that the bills have to get out of the opposite chamber's policy committee. And then a week after that, literally 1 week after that, there's another deadline called the fiscal cutoff. And if bills have fiscal notes, money appropriation larger than $50,000, they have to go through to a fiscal committee. So there's so many different components, and we're like bound by these specific dates. And that's why these call to actions are so important, because sometimes we're literally up until the last minute trying to get bills through those specific cutoffs. So things are moving by really quickly. There's things change really fast as well. But we really appreciate so many community members' willingness to participate in this process and answering our calls, answering our action alerts to email their legislators. That's so important.
Thank you, Roxana. So the takeaway there is, when you get that email, that action alert or whatever it is, don't delay, because we're typically working against a timeline, and it really matters when legislators hear from their constituents. It really matters. We even get feedback directly from them. Oh, well, we got X number of emails based on your action alert. So, it's real. Okay, so I would really love to turn to some of our family members who have just brought this heart and courage into a broader conversation, because you don't want to see happening to other people what you have had to live through. And so I'd like to turn to Nickeia first and just have you talk a little bit about how you got into this work and some of the ways that you're doing it. I know you're engaged with NAACP as well as with the Coalition for Policing. So if you could just tell a little bit about your journey into this and what you're working on right now, that would be great.
Thank you. I do this work to save the population like my brother, deemed unworthy. Carlos was labeled at a young age, pushed through the school to prison pipeline, never really given the care or need to really address his poor choices that led to criminal encounters, resulting in very lengthy sentences from the age of 13 until 43, when his final sentence was death, passed down by the Vancouver Police Department, with no regard for his life or his children. It was through this work I, along with strong allies and families alike, will fight and spend countless hours and back-breaking evenings making sure we are not bystanders in this fight for justice and equality through fair and just laws and policies that govern our community, that govern our communities equal, no matter the color of your skin.
Thank you so much for that, Nickeia, and that's so important. And one of the things that we know is that no one knows solutions like people who have lived the problem. So you participate in this legal redress community with Vancouver NAACP. Can you talk about what that committee is and what that does?
Yes, the Vancouver branch, we have some members from our NAACP branch that sit on the Vancouver Community Task Force on Policing, where we hold the Vancouver Police Department to the task of implementing the PERF recommendations and study the body cameras that we hope to implement very soon. And PERF stands for Police Executive Research Reform. And the Vancouver Police Department spent $98,000 to hear their opinions on what would make their department better. We still have yet to see a great amount of implementation, yet they are working diligently at starting to implement the changes that PERF recommends. We have issued a desire to enlarge the goals of the community with an oversight committee with real power to implement and enact real policies and laws to change the way our 4% of Washington state makes up 18% of Washington prison population. Do the math. The rate in which we are over-policed, undereducated, yet expected to make choices that never lead to a stern look or legal consequences, when the very well-off educated white population can kill innocent people in mass numbers, harm children, kill elderly, all while given the adequate advantages to know and discern right from wrong. Our children don't always get that chance. Clayton Joseph, 16, killed just days apart from my brother. The Vancouver Police Department and the Clark County Sheriff's Office have a great deal of work to do to prove the words of their spokesmen and women, that they care, that the lessons are being given on getting it right, using each killing to better understand how to make it better for the community. How is that when the very same counties stood with law enforcement in applying pressure and blatant disregard for what a glimpse of justice for all looks like? Killing House Bill 1202. These bills are not the end all. This fight isn't one for the bystander who's okay as long as it doesn't affect them. Staying quiet, allowing systemic racism, desperate policing, and killing of the BIPOC community to continue right before their eyes. Lots of police say should. We want shall. There's too much leeway for officers, too much difference to the guilds. The time is now.
I really appreciate all of what you said, Nickeia, and it really brings home the point that we've often said about the justice system, when people go to court, there's two different systems, right? There's a system for people who have money and means or privilege of various kinds, which often can relate to race and gender. And then there's the system that is the rest of the folks who don't have those privileges. And what you're pointing out in your conversation and in the work and advocacy you're doing is that the same is true of policing and public safety. There's two different systems, and communities of color quite often do not get the benefit of public safety. They get the brunt of public safety being created, or the idea of it being created for others. And so I want to turn to Sonia as well, because you have both that personal experience and also that advocacy experience, and ask you essentially the same question: what's driving you at this point, and what are some of the specific things you're working on? Obviously these bills, but what are some of the things that you're doing to try to make the change that we know we need?
Well, I got involved with this work because, my 20-year-old son was murdered, and he was a student, and, he was a kind, caring person. He was helpful, he was smart, he was wonderful, he was beautiful, he was a humble person. And on June 24th, 2017, Giovanni Joseph McDade was profiled. And this typically happens, with Black and brown kids all over America. And, he was driving, and the officers believed that he was in a stolen car. After Giovanni was stopped for 10 minutes, the officer found out that it was not a stolen car and that it was his vehicle. My son complied to a traffic stop and later fled the scene. The officers pursued my son into a hot pursuit. It escalated the situation, using deadly force several times. The officers trapped my son in a cul-de-sac, and Officer Davis parked his patrol SUV and walked around his vehicle and stepped to the side of my son's car and shot 2 rounds, killing him. That officer claimed to have feared for his life when he walked towards a moving vehicle. Now, this happens far too often when officers claim that they fear for their life to use deadly force. And most of the time in Washington state, it's considered justifiable. And, you know, this is disturbing because innocent people are getting killed everywhere. And this word that they use, you know, I feared for my life, it's ridiculous. And it just undermines life, the life that they've murdered, the life that they've taken. And it just gives officers the authority to act above the law and recklessly. You know, my son was not a threat. He was unarmed and he ran, sure. But these officers violated department policies. They escalated the situation and murdered my son without any repercussions. Now, this happens all the time. You know, unarmed, young people of color are always murdered, and they're innocent. The investigation into my son's murder was not credible. Evidence was tampered with. There are multiple missing documents that I've requested and have yet to receive. There are countless lies and cover-ups as to what happened in the murder of my son. And this will be public in trial this summer. But, you know, the investigation to all the murders in Washington state are not credible. This happens all the time. Evidence is tampered with. There's multiple cover-ups in all of these cases, and that goes into why it's important to have independent investigation. And, you know, I want the people to know that, you know, I believe that my son would have not been stopped had he been white, because the data on how force is used and against whom can be found at the Bureau of Justice Statistics. And in that data, it says that Black Americans are more likely to be stopped by police than white residents, both in traffic stops and on the street. Black and brown people are pulled over 2 times higher than the rate of white males. And Black males are 16% of the population in Washington state. Native Americans have the highest rate of fatal encounters with law enforcement in Washington state and across the United States. Of course, my son should have not fled the scene. However, more importantly, officers didn't need to chase him, should have not escalated this situation, and didn't have to use excessive force multiple times, and should have not shot into a moving car, killing him. Remember, my son had not committed a crime, and he was unarmed. They had no reason to pursue him. I've been working with Not This Time since 2017 on police reform and advocating for impacted families across Washington state, mainly because families were left in the dark when their loved one is murdered, and there really isn't anyone that you can go to for help on these types of issues. And so when I first got involved with Not This Time, it was mainly to work on Initiative 940 to de-escalate. And in 2018, that bill passed in Washington state, and it was implemented in 2019. And here we are today in 2021. Since 2019, the bill of Initiative 940 for de-escalation was passed and implemented. 100 people have been killed in Washington state. And that just shows you that, you know, officers are not really taking the law seriously. They're not de-escalating, and that is why we are here today. I got involved with Washington Coalition for Police Accountability this summer after the murder of George Floyd. And with our outrage in this community, we organized and created some of these bills that we thought were important, and why we needed to change the law and police reform.
Thank you, Sonia. And you know, for you, and I think Nickeia both, you come into this work out of tremendous personal grief. And I'm so sorry for what you've experienced. At the same time, you make a compelling case why anyone should care about this, why anyone should get involved. And I would like to ask Enoka about how and why ACLU is engaged in this fight as well, and what our approach, some words perhaps about what our approach has been in the face of what we have learned from folks like Sonia and Nickeia.
You know, the ACLU of Washington and the ACLU in general has been working on police issues since its founding. You know, so this work is, in some ways, the problem hasn't changed, right? But the solutions now, I mean, it's pretty amazing what opportunity there is right now in this moment to try to change and to make big change, you know. And a year ago at the legislative session last year, having these kinds of police bills was unheard of. You know, there was a really sort of small data bill that was that was introduced, and it didn't even get a hearing. You know, and so it's pretty amazing that these bills are alive and are moving through, and that would not have happened without the coalition and the sort of the power behind it, or without the people who took the streets last summer. And you know, at the ACLU, we really do want to honor those voices of the people most impacted by police violence and follow their lead. And the coalition has really been a way for family members to get involved and to lead this work. And I think the reason why we picked these bills in particular to focus on is because we do think that they're foundational. You know, one of the reasons there's so much police violence is because police have not been regulated. You know, it's an unregulated profession. And so the bills that we're sort of highlighting really get to sort of the baseline. But as you see, it won't take one bill. It's not just one bill that's going to change policing or improve the outcomes. We need all of these bills and more. You know, Nickeia mentioned that one of the bills that we were fighting for, the Peace Officer Accountability Act, which is HB 1202, it died. You know, and that was a way that it would have made it easier to sue police officers, to sue police departments, to hold officers and departments accountable. And it didn't work out this year, you know, so there's still so much to do just to get these bills across the finish line. But then even beyond this, there's going to be work to do, you know, like I mentioned before, the local level, you know, what we can do there. And both Nickeia and Sonia are involved in really amazing work at the local level.
Thank you for sharing that. So I guess speaking of the local level, with the organizations that Nickeia and Sonia belong to, NAACP, Clark County, Not This Time, the Washington Coalition, these are also, I don't want to say new organizations. I mean, NAACP has been around for hundreds of years, right? But some of these coalitions that have come together around police activity do feel relatively new, like within the last, you know, decade or so. And I'm wondering if either of you would like to speak to, from your perspective, why it's so important for there to be these community-based approaches and these community-led endeavors to try to make change. And Nickeia or Sonia, I don't know which of you would like to go first. I'm looking at your faces to see if anybody's looking alert. And Nickeia, you smiled, so you're up.
Thank you. I think that it's never a better time to understand that the community is the key. The community holds the power. It's together that you move the people into the positions that hold the power to push the bills across. We have to come together and realize how strong we are unified. And that's what the coalition has brought. It's brought a bunch of families that didn't ask to be brought together. We dang on sure didn't want to bury our loved ones to seek justice that gives our children a real, true fighting chance. So I just would say to the community that today is the day. You know, it's the time to say enough is enough. You've waged a war on our skin for far too long. We thought we made monumental gains with some of the pillars in our lifetime, but we're still fighting the same battles. They're just dressed up different. It'll take all of us together to form committees in each area with real oversight and power to move policies and laws and implement the real change that will save us. And not just us, but all of the population that law enforcement deems unworthy of life and liberties. Because it's not a training issue. It's not a fact that they don't get trained. Law enforcement has very great training programs. They have very great implementations of how to use de-escalation skills. They show it in a numerous amount of cases with Caucasian suspects. They show how they can not kill you, take you to jail, no matter whether you pull a AR-15 that matches their military style equipment, or whether you're shooting at other people, or no matter the situation, we cannot continue to allow two sets of laws to govern our nation. It's not just in Washington state, it's all across the nation. It's not just a problem that some of us can see, we can all see it. So we have to all choose to not sit by and let it continue to be someone else's problem because your skin doesn't happen to fit the BIPOC community. We have to all come together and stand in unity for those that may be related to you that are of the BIPOC community, or those that may be related to you that are of the mental health community, of the homelessness. There's so many people that are deemed unworthy and are treated with less liberties to their life. And it is not an okay thing. It is something that we have the power together to change and implement real policy that protects our lives for generations to come. It's not that these bills are the beginning and the end of all. It's just the foundation. We're barely scratching the surface, but we need these bills to get the first step to stand on. And so I ask you to come out, listen hard when they explain how to actively be a part of your community, because your neighbor's life may depend on it if yours don't. We can't be judged by our skin. We have to be judged in a proper weighing by our poor choices, and also offered the ability to really be rehabilitated and enter your community once you have paid your debt to society. I thank you.
I feel, if we were in our real-time, real-life space, like in our KEXP studio, the people would have been cheering as you spoke, right? Because you nailed it. You nailed it about the role of community and what they need to do and what people need to bring to the space. And I miss that about being on Zoom, when the people in the audience get riled up with us. Sonia, did you want to add anything to that?
Boy, it's hard to follow her. But, it's important to have impacted families at the table, making these policies, passing these policies, being involved every step of the way, because we're the ones that are affected. Our kids are the ones that are affected. And if there's anything that we can do to make sure that every time our kids walk out the door, whether they're driving or whether they're walking, that every encounter that they have with law enforcement, that there is some accountability, that there is some measures and standards that they should follow for the safety of our kids, for the safety of our neighbors, for the safety of Black and Brown folks, for the safety of people who are having mental health crisis. And currently, it doesn't feel very safe for us. And it shouldn't matter what area code you live in. Everyone should have trust that they're taken care of, that they're safe if they have an encounter with law enforcement. And currently that's not happening. And that's what these bills are created by families, for families. And, you know, it's hard. Change is hard. When it's convenient for them to continue to work and be able to abuse authority and abuse power. You know, the data shows you who's impacted by police violence, and the numbers don't lie. It's our responsibility to protect the residents of Washington and to make sure to reduce this discriminatory policing, which they're facts. We can't deny them. We can't deny it. They can't deny it. And you know, we're known for being so progressive in this state, yet we're lacking policy change that addresses policing.
Right.
And accountability. In many states across Washington, you know, across the United States have already changed policies. Even at a federal level, they've addressed police reform, you know, just last week. So we're still behind on police reform, and it's time to do the right thing and be on the right side of history. But most importantly, Washington cannot continue to condone the behavior of these high-risk officers, and it's our job to continue to work on saving lives, especially the most vulnerable residents of Washington State. And you know, just to get these bills passed without watering them down to the point where they're not effective. And let's just improve the policing profession so that we can feel trusted. You know, we can feel that we're going to be able to make it home. Make sure that we're not, you know, getting beat up, or make sure our rights aren't being violated. And so, you know, that's the most important thing to do, is just call and be a part of that change and helping to make that change happen. And like Nickeia said, you know, it's up to us to fight for what we want, because the oppressors are not going to give us what we deserve or what we want. So just keep yourself in the loop and do your part for fighting for what's right, and fighting for justice and accountability and equity for all.
I really appreciate that, Sonia. And it made me think of something I want to direct to Roxana, because, you know, you have self-described as a policy wonk, right? But you think about, you also care very deeply about community, and you're always looking at, you know, how does change happen? And I'm curious for you to talk about, as somebody who's in the legislature all the time, but we also know that the legislature can do just so much, and then other things have to happen at the local level or at the community level. And I just wonder if you can sort of comment on that, just sort of big picture, when you think about the change that needs to happen, what do you think we can get done legislatively? What are some of the other tactics that are needed as well?
Yeah, so, you know, I think I've been doing this work for some time, and you never see bills make it through in their first try. Like, it's just something that doesn't happen. Like, you hear so often about these bills that have been working in Olympia for years and years and years, and they just are unable to get passed. And the really amazing thing here is that these police accountability bills are making it through this session. And we've gotten commitments from leadership in both chambers that they want to pass police accountability, police reform bills. And you know, I appreciate the effort. I'm not going to say that it's not appreciated. It also just feels a little, you know, like we've been talking about this for a while, right? And like, you know, legislators are finally coming to their senses that we need to pass this. So it does feel a little overdue, but we will take it. We are here. And, you know, it's really exciting to be able to bring the community voices, the voices of the family to the table, And, you know, I think leadership within the legislature is also changing. We're seeing so many more people that come from the community, people who have lived experience, people who are people of color, who understand what it's like to be, let's say, a Black man in America and have the fear of being stopped by a police officer. Like that is a very real thing. And I think people are starting to really understand what that means. And when we have representation, we're able to actually pass these really good bills. So, you know, I think to get these bills passed in Olympia this legislative session, we can't, you know, let up. We are on day 60 of a 105-day legislative session. We are more than halfway there, but we're not there yet. So email your legislators, and if it doesn't matter what pocket of Washington state you're in, every legislator needs to hear that these bills are important, that they're a priority for you, that you believe that these bills will make your community safer. And because, you know, like there are so many bills that make it through the legislative session every year. Everyone's fighting for their sort of spotlight, and we are in the same boat. We need to fight for our spotlight as well. And as Nickeia and Sonia said, this is just the beginning. There are so many other bills that need to pass. Other things that y'all can do to get involved. As I mentioned, our bills made it through the House of Origin cutoff. They're now being heard in public hearings. We have 2 upcoming public hearings on some of our priority bills. One of them for House Bill 1267, which is around independent investigations. That bill is being heard on Monday at 9:30 a.m. And we're gonna drop the link in the chat where you can go literally directly to Sign In Pro. It states your position for the record. You don't have to testify. You don't have to submit written testimony. Like, this is like the easiest ask that we can put in front of you. Sign In Pro, it takes like 2 seconds. And then there's another bill that it's also a big priority for us, House Bill 1310, which establishes this use of force de-escalation standard that Enoka talked about. Every police department has their own standard. There are over 300 standards across the state of Washington, and we believe that no matter what, you know, jurisdiction you're in, you should have the same protections. So that bill is going to be heard on Tuesday at 1:30. We'll also drop the direct link in there, Sign In Pro, and would greatly appreciate you just continuing to elevate these issues. Talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors about these policing bills, because we need all the energy and momentum around them.
And you know, so I'm seeing those links showing up in the chat box, which is so great. So thanks behind the scenes folks who are dropping those in there. But you know, something that's interesting, Roxana, is that this year is the first time that it's been possible to do this, right? I mean, frankly, because of the pandemic and the fact that the legislative session is for the first time ever in history, right, being handled virtually, it actually creates this ability for people to participate who never before would have had the ability to do so. Because previously, to sign in on a bill, didn't you have to physically go to Olympia to do that, right? If to testify, you had to physically go to Olympia. Even to sign in but not speak, you had to physically be there.
It's a huge barrier for a lot of people. And it's really comforting to hear from legislators that they want to continue this sort of model once we start going back into the quote unquote real world, right? Like, you know, we should be incorporating these hybrid models. Government should be accessible to everyone in every pocket of the state. So, you know, it's kind of been a blessing in disguise almost to see this kind of participation for these really important bills this year.
Right, and so thank you, because I was going to ask you, do you have any intel on whether this might remain possible even in future years when COVID restrictions are lifted? So it's really encouraging to hear that that might be the case, or at least it's being considered. So I see that we are at the hour, and so I'm going to just beg the indulgence of people who are here, because I want to do one more thing before I close out. And hope that each of you that I will ask this of can give your most concise answer, right? But like, just what is it you're hoping for right now, whether it's from lawmakers or from your fellow residents of the state, you know, just if you could just state in a sentence or two a great hope that you have right now. And so Nickeia, I'm going to go to you first.
What do I want from lawmakers? I want you to hear us. Enough is enough. It is time to hold firm no matter the pushback, to stand for life and liberty for all. Don't continue being the bystander. Having knowledge, the capability to make the changes needed to save lives, knowing the dilemma our state is in as a whole, and sitting by while killings in our communities continue to take place on every news station here and across the nation. I need you to do as you promised the people when you took an oath to sit in your chair. Save our lives, for the power is in your hands. No matter how long the debate lasts, stand firm, hold fast. We have your back. We need you to have ours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Beautiful and powerful. Sonia, is there a hope that you have of lawmakers or of your fellow people in the state?
Well, I believe that, House Bill 1054 will save lives, such as hot pursuits, banning chokeholds, using violence that escalates, and the use of military equipment in the communities. And intacting and restricting all of these bills will make it a safer community, will increase the well-being of the people of color, and improve the culture of policing. I believe that House Bill 1013 addresses policing tactics that have historically been used in discriminatory manner, and it addresses the duty of care to de-escalate, where less lethal force is the first resort, and most importantly, to avoid creating force and escalating a situation where officers use deadly force as a last resort and not when they first come on scene. And I believe that, the importance of having independent criminal investigation, the House Bill 1264 is so important to families because police just can't investigate each other. They tamper with evidence, and it's just not credible if it's not independent. And, as far as House Bill or Senate Bill 5051, which requires decertification of officers to lose their license for serious misconduct, there's a lot of professionals that have a license. And if they use misconduct, the law requires that they're fired or that they lose their license. Why are we not applying that same type of license to an officer? It's just important for the community to help, put these demands that we have as far as these bills, because we created them based on the need. And the need is that police reform needs to happen. And to the lawmakers, these bills just can't be watered down. We just cannot continue to have pushback and like Nickeia said, we've risked as families, our heartache, our pain. We've taken the courage to take these steps to push for reform. And, we need the support from the lawmakers to actually stand up for what's right and speak up and pass these bills.
Thank you so much. Once again, you got straight to the heart of the matter. Much appreciated. Any hopes from you, Roxana?
My hope is that, ordinary people who probably don't, have never had a negative experience with law enforcement, white allies, stand up and help us out here. It's really like all hands on deck here. It shouldn't be an us versus them conversation. We all benefit from constitutional policing. We all benefit from appropriate responses to whatever the circumstance is. So, I really just ask for folks to get involved and reach out to their legislators about these issues.
Thank you so much. Enoka.
Well, my ask for lawmakers is that they pass these bills, they keep them strong, and that these bills will result in the reduction of violence. And for everyone else, for everyone who showed up last summer to in the streets, either physically or in person or in spirit, that they show up here too, that the work isn't done, and that we all keep pushing towards these same goals.
Thank you so much. I am so greatly appreciative of all of you, Nickeia, Sonia, Roxana, Enoka, for participating tonight, for bringing your passion, for bringing your heart, for bringing your wisdom. All this wisdom that got dropped here this evening is so powerful. So much gratitude. And, you know, my hope is see us, see all of us, hear these stories, understand, have compassion, find the empathy, and take action, right? Also want to say thank you to Gabriel Teodros. I see that the link to the playlist is in the chat again. And, you know, it's music about justice. It's music to get your heart pumping. We need music and the arts also to keep us strong as we go through all these various different struggles and challenges. It's a part of the whole human experience, right? And so we're so grateful for that. I want to thank you to the ACLU staff behind the scenes. You know who you are, who are keeping these events going and keeping the chat populated. And then just say to everyone who participated this evening, and thank you for your patience with running a little bit over. We're grateful for you, for your resistance, for your solidarity, for your support. So thank you for staying with us. Please keep staying with us. That is it. Stay tuned. You will get information with all the links. You'll find out about what our next Flights and Rights will be coming up, and 3 lucky winners will get some swag, and you'll hear about that tomorrow as well. Peace and blessings to all of you. Good night. Have a wonderful evening. Good night.